Okay, this is a very short video in theory, though they never are, um, of the Ultramarines that were run at LVO and how that's looking going forward here, what the common strains are for a as high level as we've seen at the biggest tournament in the world list goes. Um, so here I have their names. This is all public information on BCP, so I'm not trying to dock anybody, but those are all the names. These are quick little blurbs about what their army contains. 500 points of that is determined by like, do they have Gilliman and Tigurius? Right, that's yes, yes, no, no. Um, I only did the first four, the top four placers. I really couldn't be bothered to do the rest, considering they scored like. Not saying I would do much better in theory, but they scored just above people who only played like 2 or 3 games. So, and I think they only played about 4 games each, something like that. Um, First one is Christian. I think it's Christian, but there's also J in there. They're from Iceland, so it might be Christian. Who knows? Three Redemptors, 2 by 3. Oh, sorry, 3 by 2 Vitrix guards. So 6 of them total and 6 Eradicators. They had Gilliman, they had Tigurius. Um, They lost against Grey Knights. It was a pretty close game. I think that probably came down to a denial of some Grey Knights abilities or like a last second denial of Psychic Fortress. Probably make that slide downhill at the last minute. That was a really tight game. I really have no idea of what could have happened there. I'd like to get in contact there and ask about these games. But it lost that one. The opponent placed 595. Christian score placed 259, so obviously he went up from there. One against the Wolves. I looked at the Wolves list. It was very weird. One big pack of Wolf Guard instead of multiple small units, like the top 100 placing Space Wolf players got or had. It had no long fangs. It had no nothing. So it was a very non-optimized Space Wolf list. But that's what seems to be why it was such a big victory, 97-60. The opponent ended up placing 538, so much further below. Um, Lost to Harlequins pretty bad, 57-97. Looking at the Harlequins units and list, they had 40 troops or so in 3 transports. Not all of them the transports, obviously, but um, if I were to guess, that sounds like the Redemptors and the Eradicators just either got stuffed or maybe had a hard time destroying those transports. Those transports made it, they charged, Space Marines died. Um, the opponent plays 224, so they were a pretty competent player, actually. Um, Pretty strong. Yeah, 57 loss against Harlequins. If they really dominate the board and they're really quick, he also had a few jet bikes in the list. I don't doubt that that'd be a pretty bad swamping if you didn't have the firepower to keep those boats off of you long enough. Or yeah, whatever whatever the tanks are with the shuriken launchers. Round four against Grey Knights, the win. Another really tight win against Grey Knights. The opponents placed 646, which is pretty low. I believe this was actually the highest that opponents scored all day. I'd have to look at in the LVO lists. There are a lot of variation. Some people will score like 70 points, 12 points, and it's not just because they fought like a comparatively godlike opponent. Just it seems like in the middle of the day, a lot of people in LVO just drop off, and I guess that's fatigue or something similar, or maybe they ran out of time. Um, but winning against Grey Knights again, it was so close. Literally anything could have shifted that. Even reasonably bad dice can make 2 to 10 points pretty easily. So nothing really to say there. Round five, you played Custodes. You lost 62 to 88. This Custodes player placed in 114, so pretty close to the top 100. Um, and he had this thing called an Orion gunship or dropship. It's 500 points. It has a whole bunch of high volume, high. It has a lot of high AP shots, D3 plus 3 damage. I think it's two D3 plus 3 damage shots, high AP. They would have punched right through a Redemptor. Um, and if you put one shot in each, because it's two separate guns, or even the strength 7 gun it had instead, it would have just punched the Redemptor out and at least put it down a couple brackets, and after that, you're kind of in trouble. Um, yeah. It has a 5 up invul. It has -1 to hit. It's got 22 wounds. It hits on 2s on base. I'm sure the Custodes have some jank to bring it back up to good wounds. It had three. That list had 3 dreadnoughts, and frankly, 3 Space Marine dreadnoughts and 6 Eradicators is not sufficient to deal with 3 Telemon dreadnoughts or 2 Telemon dreadnoughts and one something else. I know. I used to run 15 Eradicators. Those are not enough to deal with that many dreadnoughts before they wipe half your army. Um, Last thing is Tau, 197 to 25. Old Tau, not good. Opponent plays 583. That kind of is what it is. Overall, like a solid performance for sure. 259 with vanilla Ultramarines is pretty excellent, especially against most of the top lists. Well, interestingly, a lot of the top lists are Grey Knights, Drukari, and not that many AdMech. It was Grey Knights, Drukari, and Custodes made up a good chunk of the top 100 lists, and I imagine a good chunk of the next 50 or so coming out of there. I'd have to look more. The losses against the Grey Knights, the wins and the losses against the Grey Knights being so close, I think are interesting. Clearly, Christian is a far more skilled player overall than those guys, or they had bad tournaments, placing um, 646 and 595. Um, yeah, but I mean that does tell me in general that if we're fighting a Grey Knight's opponent who's much less skilled than us, or maybe horribly unlucky with powers, we actually have a decent chance, which is fun. Um, Stiegler, Lay Stiegler, not sure who that is, but they ran a successor. I don't really care about successors, but the list was 2 by 3 Rads, 3 Contemptors, 2 Invictors, Phobos Lord of Deceit with redeploy, like Phobos Jank, Warlord trait, writes Wartech Marine. Nothing special, nothing new there. It's worth noting that unless I note it here on the left side of the screen, um, basically all of these ran incursors as their choice of troop. I'm pretty sure that's for forward deploy and jumping forward, getting a rod, or jumping forward and getting an engage on a side that they don't really have anything deployed on. So that's that. I'm really not too yeah, there's really nothing much to explain there about the troops. And cursors only 105 points. Some of them keep the helix gauntlet, some of them don't. But yeah, they do well enough. They forward deploy. They're cheap, so they also have a little bit of a melee punch, though. Really not significant, at least in my opinion. Um, Michael Boss had a very strange Terminator list. It had like it had 2 by 5 Terminators, 4 Power Fists, and the sergeant had a combi bolter and a power sword. And then he had 2 bike characters. I think it might have been a chaplain and a captain, and a bunch of other stuff. I don't know. It was very weird. I thought they might be a Dark Angels player who decided to run Ultramarines for some reason. Um, but no Gilliman, no Tigurius. Lost against Deathwatch, I assume, to tight play, though that Deathwatch player did much, much worse for the rest of the day. Um, so that Deathwatch player who beat him uh, placed 512. Played against Heretic Astartes, so this guy doesn't really have very much anti-tank. I don't believe that there are any Dreadnoughts, and there might have been very little Eradicators in that list. Um, right, so he played a Heretic Astartes list and didn't have anti-tank. That Heretic Astartes brought enough high toughness vehicles and rhinos and that kind of thing just to stuff him out. And that Astartes player placed 327, so pretty good player overall, and just not a good matchup with no anti-tank there. Played against Knights, he had those Terminators, he had the bikes, he had the mobility. I can very easily see how, even though he probably didn't destroy many of the Knights, though I don't particularly know, um, he definitely had the mobility to get around, steal objectives, kind of jank around. So yeah, I can see that happening, especially 71-51 is probably came down to the last few turns there of objectives. Basically, the opponent did place 747. Uh, they and their partner, I assume, because they have the same last name, placed pretty close to each other. Not really sure what happened there. I think Knights have a pretty poor matchup into a lot of the big stuff like Admech or Drukari, so that's probably why they scored quite so low. But 747 is quite far down there. But we'll win nonetheless. Following that is another loss to Grey Knights, someone who placed much lower than them in 465. Once again, it's a pretty tight race as long as you're kind of on average a stronger player than your opponent. So that's something to keep in mind. Death Guard a win, 80-76. I'm looking at the other Death Guard list. I'm really not too sure. It's a pretty generic list. Likely some very good shooting phases. Um, Finally, the win against Iron Hands. I have no clue how he won that one. Looking at the Iron Hands list, honestly, the Iron Hands players placed 565, and I guess that's all I could attribute it to. But honestly, I am shocked. Uh, Looking at it, I am kind of shocked that he beat that Iron Hands player. Um, Kind of scary. The next is Thomas Byrd from some YouTube channel that I forget. Super heavy melee list, no dreads, three eradicators only, five hellblasters, non-heavy. He did a video of his list. He was running Gellerman. When I saw that list, I was already kind of like, ooh, I feel like we're missing a lot of the stuff there. And I think that kind of played itself out in the placing and how everything worked out. He placed 387, which is still up there, still very good. He's a very good player. If you've watched any of those videos, but he had his melee army. He played High Fleet Leviathan. First game, lost 38 to 97 because he just got out meleeed. And that Leviathan list was not even like a horde of Tyranids. It was like maybe 8 models, 8 or 10 models, something like that. Just big monsters. He didn't have the high strength, high anti-tank to kill anything, and I'm sure the Scythe hybrid will just flamer the crap out of him and then charge them over and over and over again. Um, he played Death Watch. That Death Watch army was very shooty, so he kind of just melee beat shooting them, which is how things go. So that made sense, but it was a really well played win. Obviously, at 90 points, that's quite an achievement nonetheless. Um, he had a very mobile list. I know it has a few storm speeders in it, so he probably held some points or did some engage stuff while he trapped the Death Watch guys in. The Imperial Guard lost 43 to 76. I think what happened is that Imperial Guard player had enough troops. Looking at his list, he had enough troops to just send them at him every turn and stop his advance. And chip off a few guys here and there, and then every time those guards died, he psychicked, he manticored, he Lehman Russ demolished the crap out of them, and eventually everything just fell. Um, it kind of is what it is. Um, he won against Death Guard. I have no clue what I do, but that Death Guard player's list is impossible to figure out. It's just a big chunk of text. It's very ugly and very messy. Um, in theory, if we were to correlate the messiness of the list submitted to messiness of play, then I could see where that came from. The next Death Guard, he won 95 to 12. I don't know that that's possible against a Death Guard player who's living and breathing. So, which I guess is the point of Death Guard. Uh, but I think maybe the guy was late to the game, ran his clock. He had time to take his first 2 turns and maybe less. And Byrd was very gracious and gave him 12 points for Rod or something. I have no clue how that happens. Um, then he played Custodes, lost 55 to 45. That was pretty close, pretty low scoring game overall. Clearly, 97 points was possible in that 97, 85 points were possible for scoring there. So I'm not sure why they scored quite so low. Oh, I flipped the numbers here, but yeah, he lost. He was the 45. He lost 45 to 55. Um, his opponent plays 225, so clearly a very strong opponent. Kind of makes sense there. Yeah. Um, but good list. It was interesting for sure. A very heavily focused melee thing, but without like +1 strength or re-rolling to wound with heavy lightning claws or something, I can see how you just get out meleeed really quick. The last one I'm really going to talk about is Ryan Novak. Drop pod devs and Melta. I think he had 5 of each. He lost. You definitely lose efficiency on Gilliman because Gilliman's efficiency is not himself. He himself kind of sucks. Um, it's that he gives full rerolls to hit and reroll ones to wound. Um, Once the wound is in 12 inch and reroll all hits in 6. So if you're dropping devs and devastators with Melta and Grav right at your opponent, then you're going to lose major efficiency on them. Even if you Sons of Gilliman 1, you can only Sons of Gilliman 1, and that's a problem. 9 Eradicators, man after my own heart, a Chaplain, and 10 Lightning Claw Vats. I really think the Chaplain was a little bit of a waste. He kind of seems a little split up here, but Sisters lost 63 to 70. It was a pretty standard Sisters list. It looks to me, if I were to guess, he dropped the devs too hot. He blew up some stuff on the Sisters, but they don't have the volume of fire. They just do not. So probably a Sisters special weapon squad just destroyed those guys, or maybe a Sister Melta squad just melted those guys. Lost 63 to 70. That guy placed 611, so clearly some mistake happened there because Ryan placed 398. Something happened there. Not really sure. Probably something kind of unfortunate. It's a pretty close game. 7 points. Yeah, 7 points. So yeah, I can see where problems could have developed, maybe with a bad drop pod drop or terrible rolls on it, not trading up for points, and after that you're just trading down for the rest of the game. Um, yeah, just trading blows, and the sisters got the first blow basically. Again, would like to talk to these people and get to know exactly how it went, but these are just guesses. Um, Lost against Colt Mechanicus 70 to 74 is a really close loss. I'm really not sure how the other guy won. Like maybe this was somebody's dad played for them or something. That player scored really, really low. Like I'm not even sure if they were at the table the other games. This was the highest they scored by far. So this is a very strange loss. I'm really not sure. Maybe they involved a lot of stuff, or maybe they're just too tanky and he didn't get through. I really don't know what happened there. Um, Played against Black Templars. Seems like something similar to Mr. Byrd's game happened here, 95 to 16. Uh, Really, really a confusing score, especially against how tanky the Black Templar are. I'm shocked you'd get enough guys killed in that time with such low volume of fire, devs, eradicators, that kind of thing. Maybe the opponent was late and only took one turn, maybe two. Um, I really don't know. Their opponents being late seems to be a pretty common thing according to some chat rooms, but then he played Astronomy, Eldar. He won 82 to 74. So pretty close game. They were running things like War Walkers and some pretty expensive, pretty pivotal units there. So I can imagine those drop pod devs and with Grab and Melta came in and if they blew away enough stuff, enough War Walkers on their first opening shot, that was probably it for the Asiani. And again, it's within 8 points, just like the sisters. But this time, I think he might have actually gotten the trade punch up, and that's kind of led to what's happening now. Uh, Played against Dark Angels, lost 30 to 85. I don't know what happened there. I did look at his ITC in BCP like player record. He only has 3 tournaments, including LVO. But with his list, with how much Melta and Grav, he should have destroyed the bikes. I know I definitely have with my Ultramarines list with a very similar loadout. Lots of Eradicators, lots of Meltas, lots of Grav cannons, and some melee with those 10 Lightning Claw Van Vets. I really don't know what happened there. Maybe he was late to the table that time. I don't see how the Dark Angels player would have not scored more points then, though, because they can just kind of flood the whole board. Yeah, I'm really not sure what the situation was there. Melton Grab should have absolutely toasted the bikes. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. Maybe he's never played against Dark Angels before, misdeployed, deployed too far up, and got the second turn. I really just don't know there. Finally, a win against the Orcs, 53 to 39. Kind of a stronger win here. Sorry, I don't have the Dark Angel, what that Dark Angel guy placed. I can add it in later. But then he played Orcs. Um, Kind of throughout this, I think though he kind of kept whacking people who were much lower on the totem pole, 611th, 710th, 587th, 528th. He's really punching down people who are lower than him after he lost those first 2 matches. Again, they rated very low. I'm really not sure what happened there for pairings. Um, but he played orcs. That orc list had no buggies, and it had a bunch of the guys in mega armor or big something or other armor. Um, and something tells me those drop Todd devs came down, blew some of those guys away, kind of crippled the orcs' initial advance and what they usually play around. Um, and after that, I think it was done. If those drop pod devs came in and blew up a squad of choppas each, or whatever the flying helicopters are each, that's a even trade for points almost. And now we're talking. They lost their mobility or they lost their tanky mega armor guys. But 153 to 39. Looks like the orc player didn't really lose steam there. Kept punching up and then eventually just lost control, like with the sisters and the Templar, with the sisters and the Mechanicus and everything else, and the Asriani. So yeah, I mean, all in all, pretty decent showing. There's nothing here that's particularly shocking. Um, Danny right below 10 heavy and 10 regular intercessors, right? Noted that because it's very different from the norm, which was in cursors. Uh, Placed 559th. There's a massive gap there, 398 to 559th. Um, 2 Contemptors, 2x5 Dove, Malta Gravs, 2x2 Vitrix. He ran Gilliman, he didn't run Tigerius. Um, yeah, Under that was a very classic list: three Redemptors, two Contemptors, um, two Tech Marines though, and Gilliman and Tigerius, um, with incursors. Very strange. It's clear to me he wanted to run some kind of like, hitting on twos, jank shenanigans with the dreadnoughts, and that just doesn't work out. Too much investment in Tech Marines, not enough. Getting just +1 basically to hit, because it doesn't do anything to wound, no extra damage, nothing like that really. And you're putting out 6 shots of the macroplasma normally. Yeah, it's just the two Tech Marines isn't worth it. Just one, you're not going to be able to keep them alive. They're going to get Dark Lance. They're going to get other Redemptors uh, eradicated. There's you're not going to keep them alive too long, even if you have two guys up there, especially because they can only be healed once per turn. Right under that, this person ran 2x5 infiltrators, 2x5 devs with melt and grav, one Vitrix unit, and 3 eradicators. They ran Gilliman, they ran Tigerius. They placed 580 pretty low on the totem pole. Um, I can't believe I should have put more of what their HQs were here. It would have given me a better idea of remembering what their list was, but placed pretty low. I imagine there was some janky play happening. The infiltrators didn't quite get their points back. 120 is a lot, considering you don't really use them for much else but for deployment and sometimes backfielding. So that's that. Um, Josh, Hoffman, heavy intercessors, 1 unit of Vitrix, 1 unit of Invictors, 2 Redemptors, 2 Contemptors, a chaplain on bike. Really weird with the chaplain on bike, but ran Gilliman, ran Tigerius. I can kind of see what was happening here. The heavy intercessors maybe anchoring the backfield and then kind of moving up with everything else. Maybe forward deploy a little bit with the Invictor, but yeah, that 2 Redemptor, 2 Contemptor, that whole thing is no longer cutting it for Ultramarines. It's very expected. Mr. Lennon's list is excellent, but not for how the game is played right now. Um, the last guy, Christopher Drove, 2x5 Gravis, so it's all Gravis, or sorry, all grab guns, drop pods, 2x3 Inceptors, Suppressors, 2x5 Aggressors, Judicia, 4x5 Assault Intercessors, a Chaplain, and a Captain, a regular firstborn Captain. Um, Place 653. This is a super generic, super like what we would expect if we opened a Space Marines box. Like um, list of guys, which is nothing wrong. Like I would expect almost this army out of the Christmas boxes when they come out. Um, Nothing wrong with it. No Gilliman, no Tigerius though. Um, but that classic, no nonsense, very vanilla Marine list just has not been cutting it in past months. From my experience in looking at other people's tournament lists, and clearly it's played out here too. The Inceptors, they're good. I've commented many times I like bolter Inceptors, but they're just not there to get it done. The Suppressors are very good, but they're very squishy, and unless you give your opponent something else better to shoot at, those Suppressors are going next. Especially with things that have very long range weapons like flying vehicles and stuff like that. Um, 2x5 aggressors. Aggressors are just too slow. They punch relatively hard, but they have no movement capabilities. Their shooting is really terrible, um, just on output wise and like strength of the shot. Like a strength 4 shot really isn't doing anyone any favors these days. The Judicia, I really didn't see why. Maybe to keep with the aggressors and the chaplain on bike, but it's a lot of character investment into 2x5 aggressors and 4x5 assault intercessors. Some things that hold the backfield. You're not going to be buffing those 20 assault intercessors. It really didn't make a lot of sense to me. But I see what was happening, but it's such a hodgepodge of Space Marine units. It's very unfocused, and I think that's where it ended up failing. I can look more further into those, but I think the primary lists speak for themselves. Good anti-tank, whether that be Redemptors, Eradicators, something else. The Vitrix Guard are clearly proving themselves pivotal. So are Gilliman and Tigerius. Um, Tigerius for sure. Much better inclusion. Much better and much cheaper inclusion overall. I think. Gilliman really only takes his worth when he is guarded by the Vitrix. He is buffing everyone possible. Lots of melee in these lists. Um, yeah. I guess there's not really much else. I'll probably go more into depth in some of these lists and try and contact placing 259. uh, just to try and get some information and see how these games really played out. But ultimately, only 10 Ultramarines lists or so were entered. I think it was 11, but one dropped. One of those is Successor. And the highest we placed was 259, which I mean is an excellent performance, I think, for how strong the Ultramarines are right now, but it's not great. I was planning on making more of these as the new chapter approved and new FAQs and the February balance patches came out, but if you read them, you know they're kind of disappointing. Ultramarines are not changing strategy much. In fact, we're nerfed because the Redemptors cost more, so we're going to need a lot more creativity coming up here, and hopefully the Tau and the Custodians shape up the meta so much that we can find a new niche to fill that's just right. That's not just people taking Successors for Seal of Oath. Um, but that's pretty much it.